Okay. All right, let's get started. We'll let people continue to join, but welcome everyone. We're so glad you joined us today for our webinar. Before we begin, I do want to go through a few quick housekeeping notes. As you can see, everybody has been muted to avoid background noise and distractions for the duration of the webinar, but you do have the ability to unmute yourself if you have something to say out loud. We are recording the session and will be available on our website in the next few days. We will also be sharing the slide deck, and the recording will be shared with you via email. I've turned on captions just to make it accessible, but if you find that to be distracting, you also have the ability to turn that off. We warmly welcome your questions. Please type them in the chat box as they come to you, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. But if you haven't found that chat box yet, please go ahead and locate it, and please share your name and what organization you're with, so we can see where everyone's coming from. But we're so delighted to have Layla with us today, and we look forward to a great and informative webinar. On to you, Layla.
Okay, thank you all for joining. No pressure, but I would love to see some faces if you feel like turning your camera on, but no pressure. I'm going to share my screen and then we'll get started. Let's go. Okay, can you all see that? Isabella, I see you, so give me a nod if you can see it.
If you would just put it on presentation mode.
Great. Is it on presentation mode? Are you looking at it? Okay, here we go.
From the beginning, there you go.
Oh, there we go. So I can't actually see anybody, so just let me know if you can't hear me or you can't see the screen. But my name is Leila Martini. I own Olive Branch Research, and we help businesses to organize and govern their data, information, and web content so that it's findable and usable. And I'm so happy you're here today. And a big thank you to the Nonprofit Leadership Center who made this webinar possible. I'm really excited.
Yes.
So we will
just get one quick thing. Yeah. It's on presenter view, so you might want to put it on under display settings.
Oh, sure. Let's see. Where should I go?
You see display settings.
Get rid of that. Display settings.
Okay, so yeah. From beginning again.
From beginning, right here.
And then you see at the top it says display settings.
Oh, I don't have anything at the top.
Okay.
Sorry. So, sorry for the false start, you guys.
Yeah. We almost had it. Let me see.
I have presenter view checked.
Yeah, so uncheck that.
Oh, uncheck it. Thank you. Got it. All right, we're gonna start again. Okay, so Leila Martini, Olive Branch, and you can see my screen? Okay. Thank you. That really helped. So thanks again to the Nonprofit Leadership Center. I'm really grateful to be here. Today we're going to talk about the differences between data, information, and knowledge, and we're going to talk a little bit about why it's important to have good data quality and good data governance. We're going to identify some of the most common challenges for nonprofits and look at some practical solutions for how to fix those challenges. So the challenge. Organizations sit on top of a mountain of data. So it's either redundant data, like where there's duplicate, outdated content, data is trapped in silos, so this team knows what's going on, but that team doesn't, or maybe you've got inconsistent data. So that's a challenge for a lot of nonprofits. How many people, give me a little emoji if this is a challenge for your nonprofit? So McKinsey & Company indicates that staff spend about 30 to 40% of their time looking for information, which takes away from productive work that the nonprofit staff can be doing. So without strong knowledge systems in place, staff and now AI produce unreliable results, and it results in lots of wasted time, missed opportunities, redundant work where you have two people doing the same thing. So this is the challenge that a lot of nonprofits are facing. So let's take an example. So use case of retirement. Anybody have, staff member that's been there a long time or a CEO that's retired recently? You can give me a thumbs up or give me a little emoji. Yeah, so in this scenario, let's say we have Maria. She leads a global advocacy team. She's been with the organization 20 years and is getting ready to retire. So the challenge here, whether somebody's been with the organization 20 years or just a couple of years, is that when they leave, the knowledge that's in their head, the experience, the understanding, the nuances walk out the door. So that impacts the team. So new people that come in will spend time, or people that are already there will spend time trying to figure out who knows what, where do I go for this document, where do I go for that document. So that's one example of what we're talking about, the kind of challenge we're talking about. Another example of the same kind of challenge is let's take Sarah. She has a team that has thousands of files, some in SharePoint, some in Google Drive, some in Box. And what happens is nobody knows where to go for any of the files. The files are outdated, they're mislabeled. So the challenge is Sarah wants to use AI to surface insights and improve coordination, but she can't use AI until her data is cleaned up. And it creates a lot of extra time for staff to try to clean up this data. So those are some use cases that kind of demonstrate the challenges that organizations today face. So when we're talking about data, it's important to think of it in the context, a larger context. So this is called the DIKW pyramid. And I've purposely created the bottom of the pyramid to be small. Normally, when you see this pyramid, you'll see, a traditional triangle pyramid with wisdom at the top in a narrow point. But the reason I did it like this is to show that if we don't have a stable base, if data is not stable, if we don't have good rules around our data, then everything else will suffer. So we're going to take a look. I'm going to take you on this journey from data to information to knowledge to wisdom. We're going to look at why these are all important. So data is the foundation. These are the raw facts. These are the names, the dates, the amounts, the service counts. These are the things that for nonprofits, it's how you track how many people you've served. Let's say you're Meals on Wheels and you want to know how many people you've served. That's a piece of data. It's looking at your how many documents you've got in your file system. It captures outcomes and metrics that you might report to funders. So without accurate data, everything that comes later is going to be unreliable. So information is different than data. Information is organized data. It's data that's put into a context. And so when we're talking about information, we're talking about with nonprofits, things like reports that show trends on monthly clients being served. It demonstrates program outcomes. It supports grant reporting. These are the kinds of presentations to the board. It's where you're starting to make a context for your information or for your data so that it's understandable. So knowledge. Knowledge is what you learn when you analyze information over time. It's very nuanced and it has to do with understanding, but also with experience. So for nonprofits, knowledge helps you understand what's driving demand, seasonality, policy changes, referral sources. I'll give you an example. I used to work for the American Cancer Society a long time ago. And the number one thing you can do to help people stop smoking is create a state tax on tobacco. So what we would see is policy changes, increasing the tax would occur, the tax would go up, more people would want to use smoking cessation services. So that's what we're talking about when we're understanding what is it that's driving demand for your program. Knowledge also helps identify what's working, what's not working, helps you to recognize the processes that are breaking down. Maybe there's a delay in intake, maybe there's gaps in referrals. And it helps you to build kind of an institutional memory so that if somebody that's been with the organization a long time leaves, it's really damaging to the organization. So far we've talked about data, information, and knowledge. So now wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to make knowledge, to take your knowledge and to make sound ethical decisions that are mission focused. So for a nonprofit, this might be deciding how you're going to allocate limited funding across programs. You have to make decisions about that. Those decisions rely on what you know based on experience, which comes from the data and information in your organization. Maybe you have to choose which services to cut or which to expand. You have to make strategic decisions that are based on evidence because you have stakeholders you need to report to. So making wise decisions is damaged if you don't have good data. So all four of these things are important, but it really starts at the data level. So if data is messy or flawed, your information is going to be fragmented, knowledge is going to be flawed, and decision making is going to suffer. So strong data and information governance, and we're going to talk about what governance means. It protects the entire pipeline. And so governance is really the first step in solving the data challenge for nonprofits. So what is it? So governance is a system of roles and rules and processes. Okay, it says who owns this data, who's allowed to access it, where is the data stored, what standards are we following? Are there any, are there any like US guidelines or specific state standards that you're following? How long do we keep that data? What happens if something goes wrong with the data? How often are we doing those quality control checks? So governance is like a plan, a written document that outlines these things. It shows that you and your organization have thought through how you're going to monitor or check your own data and information. So it's not really a software, it's more of a decision-making structure, usually in a Word document. So when we talk about data, the most important thing to think about is data quality, and there are 6 dimensions for data quality. One of them is accuracy. So data is correctly represented in real time. So like if a client's birthday, let's say, is noted in the same way across every system, and you actually have the right birthday. I knew someone who had his name was misspelled on his birth certificate. His middle name was misspelled, and it caused a lot of problems on any future documentation because that data wasn't accurate. So first dimension is accuracy. Second dimension is completeness. If you have a contact record that includes name, phone number, email, and country, but you only just have a name, that's incomplete data. And that will affect you later on down the line. Let's say you have somebody named John Smith and you have 2 clients named John Smith, but you have incomplete records. You won't know, is this the same John Smith or is this a different John Smith? So you need completeness to your data. Data consistency. So I work with government groups a lot, and what I have found is that acronyms are different from one system to the next. So let's say you work with Florida Department of Health, and in one document you call it Florida Department of Health spelled out. In another document you call it FDOH. In another document you call it FLDOH. Consistency across systems and across documents will help you know what you're talking about, but it will also help when you decide you want to transition to using AI. It will just help to have that kind of consistency. So first 3 of the 6 dimensions are accuracy, completeness, consistency. Then we have timeliness. Is this data out of date? Is it from, like you might have a staff list, or on your website you have staff that aren't there anymore, for instance. Is it valid? So are there standards for whatever your organization is? Like in knowledge management, we've got something called an ISO standard. That's basically a predetermined set of standards. So is there anything that you're working with that is a standard Or let's say dates. You have dates in different systems. Sometimes you say January 3rd, 2026. Sometimes you say 03, 26, 26. So it's making sure you've got that same format across systems. And then uniqueness. Are there three John Smiths or three John Lopez's in your donor list, but really it's the same person? So those are the 6 dimensions of data quality, and it's really important to make sure these are met to help you in your DIKW journey. So it matters because, as we said, with that pyramid, poor data is going to lead to poor decisions. So if you don't have good data quality, you can almost do a checklist for yourself to make sure you have all 6 of those dimensions covered, so that you don't waste time, so that you don't lose stakeholder trust, so that when you run reports, it's accurate. And nowadays, if you want to train your AI, it's working with clean data. So now that we understand a little bit about the difference between data, information, and knowledge, and how it affects decision making, and now that we understand data quality, let's look at what are some challenges that people usually run into in nonprofits, or really not just nonprofits, everywhere. So data challenge number 1 is inconsistent data entry. So usually the problem is that there aren't required fields, so that sometimes you end up with an incomplete record like we were talking about before, or you have different naming conventions like we talked about with the date, where you say Jan 3, 2026 versus 03, 0326. So the impact of this is that you have dirty data, you have inaccurate reporting, and frustration across teams. And some of this, it's going to sound like I'm repeating myself, but a lot of the problems and solutions overlap, which is great news, because if you do a few basic things, and we are going to get to the solutions, you'll be able to help yourself with this. So inconsistent data. So some solutions: create data entry standards, define required fields and accepted values. This would be part of a governance plan. So you want to define those fields. What are acceptable values? How should things be entered into the system? Develop a data dictionary. Define what each field means and how it should be used. Train staff. That's really important. Make sure, if I work for you, that I am going to do the same thing that Jake or John or Mary are going to do. Everybody's on the same page. And then monitor quality assurance. So maybe set up, in your governance plan, maybe you say every month, it's like spring cleaning. Every month or every quarter, we're going to go through this information and we're going to check reports for completeness, for duplicates, for whatever. So those are some solutions for data entry. Another challenge, we've already sort of talked about this, is knowledge loss. So when staff leave their positions, either because of retirement or they found another role, it impacts the staff that are remaining, because it slows down decision makings. The lessons learned by the last person aren't documented anywhere, and the new person ends up making the same mistake. And about 20 to 30% of that person's critical knowledge just walked out the door. So solutions for this are knowledge retention services. There's a whole protocol, but basically knowledge retention is a deliberate process of capturing and preserving and transferring critical organizational knowledge. It can look like different things. It can look like lunch and learns. It can look like actual written documentation. But it's important that when staff leaves, before they leave, and actually before they're even thinking about leaving, to make some sort of documentation. I'll give you an example. Let's say you are the director of development, and you've worked with these donors for the last 15 years. And now you're leaving, and a new director of development is coming. Well, that new director of development will know everything that's in that database. So they'll know who the donors are, how often they donate, how much they donate, but they won't know things like that donor has a son in college. That donor got involved because of these reasons, because their mother, let's say it's hospice, because their mother used hospice. This donor loves coming to this event that you have. So those personal pieces of information will be lost because they're not documented somewhere. That's an example of knowledge retention. Another challenge is data silos. So a data silo is when you have data that's in different locations, and maybe this department doesn't know what this department is doing. So let's say data is stored across a client relations management system, a CRM, or a spreadsheet, or a shared drive, or an email. You've got it in different buckets, and there's no shared definitions, no integration of those systems. So what can happen is you get conflicting reports. You have to like reconcile, look, is this data the same as this data? And it just creates problems for staff. It slows down your services, and it creates distrust among your stakeholders. So some solutions for data silos, and again, some of the solutions will overlap from other challenges or be very similar. But one example is create a data map. So what that does is it documents where key data lives. It'll show, okay, these types of files are over here in this database. These types of files are in this database. So we call that identifying a system of record for each data set. You're mapping out where things live. Then you're deciding on a single source of truth. So instead of, me and Jake and Jane and Adam having a different places that we put our files, maybe I store them on my desktop, maybe Adam stores it on SharePoint, and maybe Jane stores it in Box or in Google Docs or something. If you create a single source of truth, everybody knows this is where it's stored, these are the files, how you name the files, and this is how things should be ordered. It cuts down on a lot of confusion. So that's what I mean by like a single source of truth. And then we want to reduce shadow systems. So we want to migrate, let's say there's spreadsheets in Google Docs and in Box, and we now want to start using SharePoint. We have to migrate everything over to that one location and make sure that the links don't break. Because let's say you had a stakeholder, like a presentation to the board where you had links from all these Dropbox and Hub, let's say, and then you want to migrate to SharePoint. You could do that, but you have to do it in a way that those links will kind of redirect. And then you want to assign data owners. I think this is really important because it will help organizations feel less overwhelmed if they share the burden, that there's an individual looking at these files, there's an individual looking at these files, an individual looking at these files. So share the data ownership among your staff. So those are some solutions to data silos. This is my favorite one to talk about because this is my favorite one to fix. So redundant, outdated, and trivial content, whether we're talking about in your files, whether we're talking about on your website, this is my favorite thing to fix. But basically, what we're talking about when we talk about redundant and outdated and trivial, by trivial, I mean, maybe you have a document that nobody's looked at since 2003. It never gets opened, but it's taking up space on your SharePoint and it's not in an archive system. That would be an example of trivial. But basically, this arises from having no version controls. So you've got 15 documents, all the same document, but different versions, but there's not like any kind of order to how you're versioning it. There's no archiving process. Old content was never reviewed, never retired, never replaced. And there's multiple versions of the same file. Or how many of you have ever seen a file like this, like final, version 3, revised, really final. So things like that are causing a problem. And the impact of that is you end up creating, grant submissions, let's say, based on outdated policies or outdated data, or you pull incorrect reports for your board. You have compliance problems during auditing. So it's really important to take a look at solutions for this one. And we're going to talk, there's a lot of them, so we'll talk about those. So You want to establish version controls. So usually things like SharePoint have like a version history control where you can actually see the dates that each version was created. So you want to enable version history and prohibit storing critical documents on personal drives. So you want to standardize file naming conventions. This is another great thing to put in your governance document. How are we going to label files? And then do it. So are we going to say year, month, document name, version, and status? Then you would do that across files. Another solution, this will be familiar to you, is define a single source of truth. Again, identify where is everyone storing materials and how are they storing materials, and duplicate final folders. There should be one final folder. And if, let's say something happens and a final document, something that's designated as final, gets revised, then that now gets relabeled and put somewhere else. And the actual final gets put in the final folder. And then again, training staff, clearly communicating to staff. Another solution is to implement retention and archiving policies. So I used to work on government websites, and they would have a lot of outdated content, but they would have to keep it based on federal law and federal rules. So they had archives that they would put, it was still public, but they would put it in a different section called an archive. And so you can do this too. You can create an archive on your, I'm going to use SharePoint as an example. Not that I think it's the best one, but it's an example. So you can define how long do documents need to be kept? Like what's our parameter? In the government agencies I worked with, it was 3-year parameter. If anything over than 3 years is considered old. You want to separate those active files from the archive files in a way that's very distinguishable. And then you want to conduct annual reviews, again, spring cleaning. Other solutions for, we call it ROT, R-O-T. Other solutions for this are, again, assigning the content owner, somebody who's designated and responsible for that set of files, and using metadata, which we're going to define in a minute, but metadata whenever possible. So metadata is data about data. So it's like a way to tag and label your files. So maybe you have a program category. So maybe you label a file behavioral health, housing, food security, or you label it by delivery channel, in-person, virtual, phone, counseling, referral, case management, service type. So it's basically data about data. And let's go back for a sec. So you want to be able to tag your documents, and usually a system like SharePoint will allow you. There's something called a knowledge agent within SharePoint that will allow you to create, you have to enable it. So get your IT people to enable it. But it will help you to have these tags associated with your documents. And that'll allow you to filter, like filter when you search. So like if you've ever been on Amazon, I'll just use that as an example, and you are looking for running shoes and you want women's running shoes, size 9, Adidas, then the way that you're able to find that kind of content is because on the back end, they've tagged that content. They've tagged the shoe that is Adidas for women, size 9, and so it pulls it up. So you can do the same thing for your files and by using metadata, and it will help you search and sort. So I'm giving you lots and lots of information so far. So we've looked at the data, information, knowledge, wisdom hierarchy, kind of looking at how data relates and affects decision making. We've looked at some use cases for challenges within organizations. We've identified some challenges and some solutions. So now let's go back to those 2 use cases we talked about at the beginning. So again, we've got Maria, she's going into retirement after 20 years. And one solution, an organization like mine, for instance, would come in and provide knowledge retention services to help the team that Maria's leaving behind. So it would look like interviewing and documenting things that are important. It would look like talking to all the stakeholders to find out, okay, when Maria leaves, what are we going to want to know? She's the only one that knows what. and how are we going to get her to tell us before she goes? So that would be an example of a solution we could apply to this particular use case. Second use case was files all over the place. An organization like mine, or even within your own organization, you can start by cleaning, organizing, and structuring those files and that content. So you would just do a basic inventory, look at things, look at indicators like these files haven't been touched since 2002. That's an indicator that something's outdated because you haven't needed to look at it. It's like when you clean your closet, you've got that box of skinny jeans in the attic that you haven't looked at in like 5 years. Just get rid of the jeans, okay? Just get rid of them. So we would be doing the same thing, cleaning out those systems and basically updating that data to make sure it's usable. So I'm going to give you a real life example. I worked with an organization that started out as a super tiny nonprofit in the late 90s, and they grew rapidly. And because they grew rapidly, their systems didn't grow with them. So they had to just do the work and get the work done. So what ended up happening is they ended up with knowledge silos. So this department didn't know what this department was doing, or inconsistent onboarding, depending on who was giving the training. People retired that had been there for a long time, so nobody knew the history of what was happening. And they had all kinds of different file systems and different technology they were using. So my approach for working with them was conducting 31 stakeholder interviews and something called a KM strategic planning canvas. So basically, it's working with like a mural board. You get everyone together, you get little cards of common knowledge management challenges and common solutions, and you have the people in the organization identify what are our challenges. So for this group, you could go back to your organization right now and you could say, I just learned about these 6 data quality components, and I learned about some typical data information knowledge problems, challenges. Which of these challenges do you all, to your staff, do you all think we have? Here are some solutions. Which one of these do you think we should apply? So you make it a team effort. I don't know how many of you have heard of human-centered design, but basically you involve the group in making the decision. So I did this at this organization. We mapped the knowledge flows. So we mapped where things were, what their technology was, who uses it, what systems did they have into place, where were the redundancies, and then I benchmarked them against the particular standards that were relevant to me. You'll probably have your own. And then designed a roadmap for here's how we should proceed. Here's what needs to happen next. And so some of the solutions I came up with for this organization were knowledge retention framework, so capturing that information that's going to leave when you have staff that retires, creating a library of documents for their finance department, creating standardized onboarding processes, and restructuring their SharePoint, getting rid of that redundant, outdated, and trivial content. And the result of this was we established the first organization-wide KM definition and governance model. So now this organization has an actual plan for how they're going to govern their data and information. It improved their efficiency, their transparency, and their knowledge access across the organization. It enabled better onboarding, and it gave them a roadmap or like a governance plan to follow. So kind of like a map to follow. So in a minute, I'm going to ask for your questions, but I want to go over some typical questions that come up when I'm talking about these things. So usually people want to know, well, what's the very first thing that I can do to help my nonprofit? And so I would say the number one thing to do is create a governance plan. And the who, the where, the what, the why, the how, and document that single source of truth. Okay, let's decide today. Are we using SharePoint? Are we using Box? Are we using Google Docs? Like what are we using? and then start assigning owners of those data sets. I would say that's the number one thing you could do. Number two, how do we reduce duplicates in our database? Usually by establishing data entry rules. If you have complete records that are entered in a certain way, you usually won't have duplicates, or you can easily sort like in a spreadsheet for those duplicates. And then clean quarterly, like really diligently stick to that schedule. Maybe you designate staff that are supposed to be looking at that kind of thing every quarter, every year, let's say. Do we need a full-time person to do this? I would say no. So a lot of nonprofits have like a committee across the organization that deal with knowledge management. Sometimes people hire an organization like mine to do what's called fractional knowledge management, where we come in and we look at these kinds of things for you, create plans for you. But I wouldn't say full-time is necessary. If it's a big organization, like the one that I did a project for, I would say, yes, they're going to need a full-time person if it's a big organization. Another question that comes up is how often should we check? I kept saying quarterly, but really I think it depends. If you have a high volume of data, I would say monthly. If you have kind of a medium volume, I'd say quarterly, and then annual audits for everything else. And then a lot of people want to know the difference between data governance and IT. So I'm not the tech person. I work with the tech people. I translate, for stakeholders what the tech people are saying. But IT basically maintains systems and security and access, while governance teams or data governance teams define rules about how data is entered, how it's organized, how it's used. And then how do we get staff to follow standards? Keep standards simple. I mean, I have repeated throughout this whole presentation because it's really just a few basic things that will help get you on your way. And then train with real life examples. I think giving real examples is important, providing templates, recognizing people that are following the rules, and automating if you can certain tasks, not everything. People still need to have their eyes on what's happening. Another question is, what if we have too many systems? So something helpful here is creating that system of record map that we talked about before, where you document what data lives where and which is the authoritative location. It reduces confusion by 50%. That alone is going to help people. How long do we keep client or donor files? Usually you'll already know, like you'll have your own federal guidelines or state guidelines. A lot of nonprofits follow like a 3 to 7 years for many categories. And then that's it for me. I want to take this time to hear your questions and answer your questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I did a lot of talking, so now I'm going to turn to you guys. Let's see if I can see that chat. Oh, wow, 32 in the chat. Oh, all names. Nice, nice. So all of that, nobody has any questions for me?
I see a comment in the chat. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. You were talking before about the data governance board, I think it was, and working on the data from like working with the team up. How did you guys start that? Was that like you worked with the people who were already working on the data, or can you explain a little more about what that looked like?
Are you asking about when I said that nonprofits often don't have to hire somebody full-time, it's usually across the organization? Is that what you mean?
Yes. And then you were talking about how with the one team, like you did the stuff, like you talked to the team members and then you kind of worked. And so how would that look like?
Yeah. So the organization that I worked with was creating a new knowledge management department, and I came in as a consultant. And so they had one person on staff, which was really helpful because they were very large. And they also had a committee, which was really helpful. And I think that's what I was referring to. It's a committee. So let's say there's 15 departments in this big nonprofit. Somebody from each department represented, and that this group would meet regularly to discuss knowledge management. We call it knowledge management, but it could be, you could call it data management, information management, because it kind of all is all encompassing. So this group, but it had to come from the leadership. The leadership had to help drive and encourage and reward this kind of activity, because I think a lot of times people worry that they're wasting time if they're going back and cleaning things up, but in fact they're actually saving themselves time in the end. So the way it worked was it was a top down in this particular instance, where the leadership decided that, or not just one person, but leadership across the organization decided that they were going to have a full-time knowledge management position in a committee. And then they brought in a consultant, which was me, and they could have done it themselves, but I think they didn't have time to do it themselves. So they brought in a consultant, and I did interviews with the people that they kind of designated as like in the know about what was happening in the organization. And I was able to see this is where we are. So I think if you're going to start this in your own organization, you want to first see, where are we? What systems do we have? How do we use them? Do we have any documentation? Do we have any sort of governance? Who's the person that usually enters the data? And then you want to see where the gaps are. If you're missing all those things, it's okay. It's not a problem. You can fix it. So I would say start there. Look at where you are and what you have. Did I answer the question correctly? I mean, did I meet what you were asking?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sure, no problem.
I have another question.
Sure.
Okay, so like you mentioned like the audit and like cleaning, like quarterly clean or spring cleaning or just cleaning out data. Like what is that? Like, can you go a little more in depth about what that process looks like?
Yeah, I can. I'm going to give you two different examples. So let's say you have a website. You might pull a content inventory and look at, I don't know how big your different nonprofits are, but I'll give you an example of, I did work with a few federal agencies, and they had tons of pages. So we would pull a content inventory and look for um, content that had low page views, things that people weren't looking at very often. We would look at things that were outdated, which you could sometimes see in the URL if the date was in the URL. So it would start with an inventory. So that's website based. But the second example would be like even in your SharePoint, start with an inventory. Here's what we have. Here's when it was created. This is why I said knowledge agent is important. If you have SharePoint, there's you can enable something called knowledge agent, which can pull out some of these things, like tell you when the last time the file was opened. But even if you didn't have that, you could just manually look at what are the files, when was the last time it was opened. Again, if it was 2003, probably that's going to go into the archive, and you just systematically go. I like a spreadsheet. I like an Excel file because I can keep track of, okay, here's the inventory of files. Here's important metadata. So on the website, that might be even not just the website, even SharePoint. The date that file was created is going to be really important for you. And then you can sort the spreadsheet if you like, maybe by the title of the file to see if you have redundancies, rather than opening each and every file. Like usually the title will tip you off. So I think it all starts with an inventory, and then documenting if you archive something, documenting if you move something, if you migrate something from one part of SharePoint into another file. The preferred technique is to click on move file rather than changing the link yourself, because it won't break the link that way. If you put I think it's a right click and it says move file to this location. So did that answer the question?
Yeah, it did. I did have an additional question to follow up
Sure.
with that. So is it better to like my nonprofit is a museum, so is it better to
Oh,
kind of split up the if you're trying to clean up a SharePoint, is it better to do it by like program or is it better to do it by like the type of file? So like if we have different programs that all have similar files, should it stay together or should it be like all contracts go here, all receipts go here, but it's like split up between different programs?
yeah, that's a good question. I like the idea of by program, but I think whichever way you decide to do it, having a governance plan first, where all the stakeholders get together and decide, okay, this is the way we're going to do it, and you document that. Here's how we're doing it, and then you assign. So, let's say somebody in this program, program A, somebody in program B, somebody in program C, they're each responsible for organizing their files in this way that we said we were all going to do it. And then maybe you have somebody spot check each of the programs, let's say. But that governance plan is the most important thing to do first.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
You're welcome. Anybody else? I know it can be overwhelming because I'm sure you all are very busy. I've worked with nonprofits and people are swamped. Um, you don't have to do it all today. You just do little by little. You start with these processes, start with the governance plan, just kind of get an idea of what you want to do, and then gradually start working on it. It's like cleaning out your closet, just a little bit at a time. Um, and yeah, it makes me so happy that you all were interested in attending this, that you had, that you stayed, that you listened. And I'll just give a little more time in case anybody thinks of a question.
I actually have another question now that I thought of it.
Sure.
How important is it to migrate information that we're using off of like websites into a more permanent document file?
Oh, interesting. Can you tell me more about that? So you have information that's stored on is it a public facing website or your own website? Like an
If we
internal website?
are, if we're like collecting, I guess like because like we're selling tickets for classes, is it important to document that elsewhere, or should we kind of keep it on the like registration website that
Oh,
we're
that's
using?
an interesting question. I think only if you need to report, or like if you have to report out to different stakeholders, is there a way on your website to pull that data off if you need it? Like pull it into a spreadsheet?
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean,
Yes.
I would say it would be important. I like the idea of maybe just once a year you download a spreadsheet of this year, this is what we did in ticket sales, just so that you have it somewhere else as a record. Yeah,
Okay. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Right. Great
Hi,
question.
I
Oh, go
don't
ahead.
have a question. I just wanted to say thank you so much for the information. This is super helpful. And obviously you're an expert in the field, so thank you so much for
Oh my
this.
gosh. Thank you. You're so welcome. I really enjoy talking about it, and I'm delighted I could be here, and thank you to the Nonprofit Leadership Center.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
Well,
I do want to say I'm going to send the slides to Isabella, and she'll share them with you. My contact information is on the last slide. So if you need somebody to help you with this, if you want to, you know, I don't know, if you just chat, just, you know, give me a call, send me an email. And yep, that's it.
Yes. Well, a huge thank you to Layla for this incredibly informative webinar. And a thank you to everyone that joined us today. It was great seeing you all. We'll be sharing that recording and the slides with you all. We'll also be sending a survey, so feel free to give us your feedback on that. But if you have any other questions, reach out to us. And we hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.